All right, let's jump right in. Today we're tackling a huge moment from the Cold War, President Nixon's historic breakthrough with China. But we're not just going to look at the politics. We're going to explore a really fascinating idea that looks at these massive historical events through the lens of biblical themes. So, Richard Nixon, Communist China, and the Bible. I mean, on the surface, what could those three things possibly have in common? It seems like a pretty wild combination, right? But what if there's a framework that actually connects these worlds that seem so far apart? Well, that's exactly what we're going to dig into. Let's get started.
First things first, let's set the scene. We've got to go back in time. Picture it, the early 1970s. The Cold War has been this intense, high-stakes standoff for decades, but something new is starting to happen. The ice is beginning to crack.
And the key word for this entire era is détente. Just imagine the whole world holding its breath for years, stuck between two nuclear superpowers just staring each other down. Détente was the deliberate, careful attempt to slowly let that breath out. It was a major shift away from constant confrontation toward, well, at least talking to each other.
And if you want the single image that captured this new policy, this is it. In 1972, President Nixon does something that was frankly unthinkable at the time. He gets on a plane and flies to the People's Republic of China. This was a country the U.S. hadn't even officially recognized for more than 2 decades. This one visit completely changed the game and reshaped the entire map of global politics.
But, it wasn't all just handshakes and photo ops. Détente had real teeth. It led to actual, concrete agreements, and none were more important than the Strategic Arms Limitations Talks, or SALT. These were absolutely groundbreaking treaties designed to pump the brakes on the terrifying nuclear arms race. It was a huge step toward bringing some stability to a very, very dangerous world.
So what's the big idea driving all of this? What's the philosophy? It all boils down to one word: Realpolitik. It's a German term that basically means realistic politics. The idea was to push aside the rigid, black and white ideological battles and instead focus on what was practical, what was best for the country's interests and the overall balance of power.
And this whole practical approach gets baked into something called the Nixon Doctrine. The message from the U.S. was pretty simple, really. Look, we'll honor our promises to our allies, but you've got to start stepping up and taking the lead in your own defense. It was a major rethink of America's role in the world.
Okay, so let's do a quick recap. You've got détente as the main goal, right? Easing tensions. You have SALT and the Nixon Doctrine as the specific policies making it happen. And the whole thing is powered by the engine of Realpolitik. That's the political landscape of the time.
All right, so we've got the history down. Everyone clear? Good, because now we're going to take everything we just talked about and flip it on its head. We're going to look at these exact same events through a totally different lens, a biblical worldview. So the source material for this explainer puts forward this really interesting idea. It says, hey, what if you look past the day-to-day politics for a second? It proposes using core biblical themes, not to change the facts of what happened, but to see if there's a deeper meaning, a kind of moral or spiritual current running underneath all these political moves. And suddenly, we have this whole new toolkit. We're not just talking about power and treaties anymore. We start asking different kinds of questions. We can look for the tension between truth and deception, or for the idea of a higher power's sovereignty over nations, and, most importantly for what we're talking about today, we can look for themes of peacemaking and diplomacy.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. How do you actually connect the hard facts of history with these, theological ideas? Let's actually connect those dots.
So let's go back to our main event, Nixon's trip to China and this whole policy of détente. From a purely political view, it's all about strategy, right? Cold, hard, practical calculation.
Now, here's the first connection this framework makes. It takes that political action and draws a straight line to this very well-known verse from the New Testament, one that holds up the act of peacemaking as something incredibly important.
And there it is, side by side. The historical action, diplomacy, is seen through this theological lens as a real-world example of peacemaking. Now here's the crucial part of this interpretation. It's seen this way regardless of what was actually motivating the leaders themselves.
Okay, I know what you might be thinking. Nixon was the master of realpolitik, right? His decisions were based on pragmatism, not piety. So how does a theological framework account for a leader whose motivations are, well, not religious?
Well, the framework has an answer for that. It points to this verse from the Old Testament book of Proverbs. The core idea here is that even the most calculated plans of the most powerful rulers might be guided by a higher purpose, maybe one that they aren't even aware of. So let's put it all together. You have this pragmatic political strategy, Realpolitik, being viewed as something that operates inside a much bigger theological theme, the idea of God's sovereignty. In this view, a leader's very practical decisions can end up serving a purpose that goes far beyond what they themselves intended.
So, we've laid out the history, and we've walked through this very specific way of interpreting it. But so what? Why does looking at the past through this kind of lens even matter? What's the big takeaway here?
It all boils down to the number 2. That's it. We have 2 totally distinct lenses to look at the exact same moment in time. The first one is historical and political. It's all about strategy, power, and practical results. The second one is theological. It's looking for deeper themes of purpose, morality, and sovereignty. Same events, completely different ways of making sense of them.
And that, right there, is the real heart of this whole explainer. It's not really about Nixon or the Cold War. The ultimate point is that the beliefs and the frameworks we start with, our worldviews, profoundly shape how we make sense of everything, both in the past and in the present. And this isn't just some abstract academic exercise. It's personal. We all see the world through a particular lens. So the question I want to leave you with is this: how does your own worldview, whatever it happens to be, shape your understanding of history?